Welcome. You are here because you're a developer or a developer at heart. You have used SAP ABAP programming language to build your programs. You have worked with AWS services to build innovative solutions or aspiring to build innovative solutions. But then you have found that building solutions are not easy. SAP and AWS have different security models. Their data formats are different. SAP has a data format, AWS another one, and you'll have to find ways in which you can intermingle and use them consistently and correctly. You have found that writing code is complex, and it is not easy to replicate it. Even for one single service, you will have to write hundreds of lines of code. And finally, as integrators, you would have also seen that you have to use several third-party tools. So essentially, for every new innovation that you want to achieve between SAP and AWS, you have had to create point-to-point solutions and multiple point-to-point solutions. Building solutions has been hard. On November 17th, 2022, 2 weeks ago, we launched the public developer preview of AWS SDK for SAP ABAP. I am Yuva, and let's have some fun. I work with the EC2 enterprise team, focusing primarily on SAP on AWS. So what do we have today in our conversation? I'm going to take you on a journey that culminated in this AWS SDK for SAP ABAP. We will tell you why we built this SDK, and I've already shared some of those thoughts with you already. We'll then get into a little bit more deeper. What does a software development kit really mean? Why do developers look forward to such a kit? And then we will move on to the developer experience itself. That will get us closer to how this code will look like the moment you start to use the SDK in your environment. And finally, after you've seen this entire journey along with me through your own eyes, I'm sure you're going to be excited and looking forward to joining us in this exciting journey on building this product that's going to make your lives so much more exciting and interesting as you build innovative solutions between SAP and AWS. So let's start with this. This is a story which many of you will be able to relate to. After you go back, having spent a few days at the reInvent conference, you'll go back to your offices and you'll have to submit your expenses. So most often, you will have to submit a whole bunch of receipts. And these receipts will have to be now taken into your system and eventually processed. Amazon has got a textract service that can extract and digitize information from scanned copies of receipts as well as handwritten code. So now, what if I, as an ABAP developer, would like to write an application that can use the AWS textract within my ABAP code and do this for me? I know ABAP. I know the textract from the documentation I have read, but is this enough? Can I now put together a solution that can then make this work together seamlessly and give me the functionality that I am looking for? So software development kits are a programmer's choice. Why? Because these software development kits present the services in the most natural form for a developer. If I am a developer using Java as my favorite language, I would like to see a Java SDK, which will then essentially wrap and present the AWS services in a native way in my Java programming environment. If I'm a Python developer, I would like to see the same thing represented as a Python SDK. Essentially, what happens is that these software development kits wrap the APIs which Amazon services present. As you might have already known, the web services are all presented API first. So if at all you want to build a solution, you need to have these primitives in place. How can you interact with these services if you don't know how to interact with these APIs? And how can I make your lives better if you want to make and create these solutions on a repeatable, scalable way? And that's where SDKs play a very important role. There are over 300 plus APIs services that AWS supports. If I have to build a custom code for every single service, it's going to be unmanageable and extremely complex. And SDK gives you a very standardized way to approach these services in a way that removes all the complexities, takes care of the plumbing, and you just have to focus on the innovation that you are looking for. So why do customers, SAP customers who are on AWS, are looking forward to this? First of all, we know that innovation is now table stakes. Unless your organization is going fast on the innovation journey, this modernization path, it's going to quickly face the risk of not being the leader in the space. So you want to be on top of every new innovation that comes in so that you can present back to your business the best possible solution that they can ever get at that point in time. SAP is a very strong, very robust, highly proven, multi-decade enterprise resource planning system. It is the backbone of several enterprises. In one literature article I read that 77% of the world's GDP flows through the SAP systems. So this is huge, and the systems are big, and the data within SAP is pristine and pure and clean and used for businesses all over the world. So now we have this unique possibility of bringing the SAP system, the processes, the data, along with AWS services to create that innovation that you're looking for. And that is a multiplicative effect. On one side, you're talking about what SAP can do as a business process and innovate on the business process. On the other side, you're able to leverage the innovation, the pace of innovation AWS is able to provide for you through these APIs. We are constantly creating new services, innovating in multiple ways from AWS side, and this unique possibility is what makes the big difference. So let's see what some of our customers have been telling us. So Moderna used AWS as its backbone when it wanted to distribute the COVID-19 vaccines. And you know how effective that was in bringing down the numbers of the pandemic when we were at the peak. Liberty Mutual used the S/4HANA system to do real-time financial closing. It could reduce from hours to minutes when it applied several of this integration between what they had from an SAP side and the AWS services that they had. Similarly, we have seen other big organizations like Zalando, NG, Delivery Hero, and Engin, each one finding new innovations when they were able to bring together their SAP systems and merge and map it with AWS services. That is the power that we are trying to harness here through the SDK model. So going back to my very first opening statement, why has it been so hard? So SAP has a very strong and robust role-based access control security system. AWS has got identity and access management. These two systems are best of class in their own environments. Now when you bring these two together, that's when the complexity starts to arise. You need to have a role-based access to AWS services. And if you have to get it done right, you will have to spend enough time to ensure that everything works right the first time. That's the challenge. The next thing was about data formatting. So you have different data formats on the SAP side, you have different data formats on the AWS side. And then making sure that this marshalling and unmarshalling of data which is flowing over the wire and done the right way, again, is a complex challenge for a developer. Therefore, the code complexity increases. That's what I was told, that developers have to spend an enormous amount of time as well as write hundreds of lines of code to get an integration with one service right. And think about trying to multiply it with all the other services and the combinations that you're looking into. In one business process I want to call multiple AWS services, how much of code I will have to write and maintain. And then finally, if you have to then go back into integration scenarios where I have to use third-party software, then it becomes a point-to-point solution, increasing the architectural complexity to such a point that change becomes very, very hard. So organizations have liked to create innovative solutions, but have stepped back because this hurdle has seemed very hard for them. And this is exactly the place where the AWS SDK for SAP ABAP comes in. This accelerates the business process innovation by making it completely easy for the ABAP developers to extend and transform the SAP-based business processes. And how it does it? By essentially creating a software development kit that's available for you, that creates a standard way to access those 6 different protocols that AWS services present themselves, and allows you to work with all of these services in a very seamless and extensible way. With that, you're going to reduce your architectural complexity. You're going to maintain a strong security position because you've now mapped these in the right best practice way. And finally, and this is the very interesting part, ABAP has been a programming language of choice for SAP since the 80s. And the language has evolved as challenges in the business environment have evolved. However, this community of developers have always found it harder to be toe-to-toe with all the other modern programming languages. With this SDK, an ABAP developer can look into Python code and replicate the same kind of information and coding style within the ABAP environment to achieve the same end result. And likewise, I would encourage all of you to try the developer preview so that you can create sample code that maybe on one day I will see that the other programmers are looking into how ABAP code is written to see how they can write their code. That level of upskilling from an ABAP community to be on par with developing cloud native solutions using ABAP as a programming language within the context of what they know very well is exactly the power that brings it, the AWS SDK for SAP ABAP brings to the table. So now let's take a closer look. Where does this SDK really sit in the ABAP environment, in the SAP environment? So at a very high level architecture, you know how the SAP system is organized. At the lowest level, we have the operating system, then we have the database on the top of it, then comes in the application server. That's where the kernel is presented. On the top of it is ABAP as a programming language. And on top of it, we have this different functional modules, which you are very familiar with. This is what is running the businesses and the business process in your enterprise. Many of these business processes have natural places where they can be extended. That's where you're talking about business add-ins or bodies. And these business add-ins are created in such a way that you create extensions using ABAP code. And in this ABAP code is exactly the place where the SDK lives. The ABAP code, the custom ABAP code that you have written to extend a business process can invoke the AWS services to the ABAP SDK, and that essentially makes the communication between the SAP system and the AWS completely transparent for you. Over the wire, the REST APIs, which then call the 300 plus services that we have on the AWS side, now becomes a breeze. So now what can you build? What are the new ideas that you can bring to your table? Let's start with S3 bucket. It's a great storage space, great availability, highly scalable, highly cost effective. Now, in one organization, they had this very interesting challenge. They had a web shop, and then they had to bring in their shopping cart information as files into their SAP system to create non-trade purchase orders. Now, how they were solving it today was that they were moving the files physically onto the application server box and processing it locally through scripts and manually. The complexity of the solution can only be understood when mistakes start to happen, when changes are made in the formats. So using S3 as an intermediate storage point, the web shop files can be placed, upstream files can be stored on the S3 bucket. SAP ABAP program that's going to process and create non-trade POs can look into these files, process it, and do appropriate status changes. And finally, the PO gets on the business process as we originally planned. So this intermediation allows you to decouple systems and reduce the use of scripts and any kind of manual work. That sets up the stage for automation. So intermediate file processing using S3 as a bucket now becomes a reality that you can really put together in any of your business processes from upstream to downstream. How about Translate? Amazon Translate is a great service. So if you're looking at multilingual teams, And you want to have a mechanism that will allow them to communicate effectively. Take, for example, a customer support environment. There is a ticket that's coming in from an end user, preferably the end user happens to be an English speaker. However, your support team probably speaks Spanish. In that case, how do you want to make this happen? How do you want your multilingual team to perform most effectively? Think about Amazon Translate. Now, this is a service that can translate your request into the corresponding language of choice. And you can choose any of the languages you can think about. Then what about location service? Address cleansing is a huge challenge. If you want to maintain accurate addresses, this is a master data problem that many of you are very well aware of. So the best place to fix it is at the point of input. You want the address to be cleansed at the point of input, otherwise your data is not of good quality. You will have to run additional processes and use different techniques to dedupe and transform and do address correction, and then invoke third-party software for that. By having this embedded within your environment through an ABAP code, you can quickly call the location service to validate an address. And so the data that goes in from the user to your database is already cleaned. And that's amazing, because then that makes your quality of data improve, and therefore your further processing even more reliable. TextRact is what we spoke about. If I had TextRact as a service, it can be used to extract digital information from scans or handwritten notes. And think about the different industries that can benefit from this. I can for now understand what my doctor is prescribing if I'm able to understand his handwriting, and I can use such a system to make it work. And finally, image recognition is getting more and more interesting. Think about a spare parts business company. They would like to serve customers more easily, and the customer has to break their head to figure out what is that particular part that they want to order. They can quickly take an image and upload it and say, this is what I want, and you can use image recognition from Amazon's recognition to find out what is it that particular request is all about, and you can even probably classify it and eventually serve the customer the right. These are the kind of possibilities that come up, and I will let your imagination run wild. You can do so many things now that you have the access to the 300-odd services that AWS has for you, and you can do it within the context of your web environment. Now let's take a quick peek into the developer experience. What is it that I'm trying to tell you so far that has made the life of a developer easy? This is how a code snippet is going to look like. We have made it very simple. So now the developer is looking to pull a file from Amazon S3 with a simple ABAP method call. So look at the call. It's pretty straightforward. There's an LO_S3, which is essentially referencing the object, the bucket that you're looking at. And then from there, it gives you the bucket name and the object key to get the object itself. In the next step, you want to process that information. And finally, you want to be able to map and get a sense of any exception that happens in the process. Maybe the object didn't exist. Maybe the connection failed. How do you now react to all these situations? So the code essentially allows you to, the SDK gives you the facility to not only look into the right paths, but also the exception paths. So you have a complete solution that you're looking for. Now we know that the SAP environment is actually not a one-person's environment. It is a combination of people who make the SAP enterprise solution work. We are talking about folks who are the IAM administrators, our cloud administrators. They're the ones who are going to create the right roles for those SAP users to access the AWS APIs. Then we have correspondingly the basis administrators who are going to set up the right environment. How are they going to do it? So the way we are delivering the SDK today is via transports. So basis administrators are very familiar with this approach of incorporating new and source SAP modules into their environment by importing these transports. And then they go ahead and set up all the technical prerequisites. Having said that, having done that, they now pass the ball to the SAP security team. And this is exactly the place where I was emphasizing early on, that the SAP security model and the AWS security model have to be mapped. So at that point, you are mapping the SDK profiles to the IAM roles. Then you create the roles on the SAP system using your PFCG transaction, and then you assign these roles to users. So that's how SAP's security model comes together. And with that in place, you have set up all the prerequisites for your SAP developer. And then comes our hero, who is going to now build a business process extension using the ABAP programming language and using the SDK. This person is going to take advantage of all the facilities that the SDK has to offer, the APIs that they would like to call, looks into the documentation, writes the code in few lines, and is able to test it. And then it progresses along the dev to QA to production, the way it naturally follows. So everything is contained and managed within the context of SAP ABAP without you having to go anywhere outside the system. But end of the day, you have a business process that has been essentially revitalized with a whole bunch of AWS services. And that is the innovation that we are presenting to you. SDK by itself is a tool. It's a very powerful tool. So we encourage all of you to start thinking about how you can start using it in your environment. When I was talking about this to one of our customers, they said that previously they had a few, maybe 5 APIs on AWS that they could call. And with the SDK, they said, I can now go back to business and ask, what is the problem you want me to solve? And I will solve it for you. That's the power, that's the courage that an SDK brings to you. With that, you can be very definitive about what is that you can solve and by when. You don't have to worry about the complexity of writing code. You now have an SDK that really makes it so simple that you can start to put that into action as soon as you can. So then, now that I've spoken to you about what this SDK can do, what is it that we have for you so that you can get started? So we launched the public developer preview of AWS SDK for SAP ABAP on 17th of November. That's 2 weeks ago. With this, we give you all a chance to develop your proofs of concept, your exploration of the system, try it and tell us what is it that works well and what is it that needs to be improved. We are here to listen to you. We know that the more people who use it and test it and try it, the more robust the code will be and the more confident you will be to put it into production. So that's what a developer preview is all about. It gives us the time to experiment in real life to see whether the SDK is standing up to the expectations that you have and the expectations that we have solved for you. All AWS customers are ready to apply. We have a very simple sign-up form. So once you go into the developer guide, you will have a sign-up page, and when you go to the sign-up page, there is clearly a set of fields that you need to fill. Definitely put in your business ID and your AWS account ID, and that will give us a way to allow list your account to access an S3 bucket from where you can download the SDK. And then the process that a basis administrator has to do in terms of importing those transports, setting up the environment. We have a pretty well documented user guide. We have a complete API documentation on all the APIs that we support. With very few exceptions, all the APIs that are available in our AWS environment are available through the SDK. So even though it's a developer preview, the breadth is as wide as it can get. So you have a choice of innovating on any of these, using any of these services. So for customers who are participating in the developer preview, engineering will be directly supporting them. We are still learning. We are very eager to hear what is it that you're doing, how are you doing it, what challenges you're facing, and if there is any kind of learning that we can take and offer it back to you in a much more refined way, that's what we want to do. And you also know that the AWS constantly keeps creating new services. So the SDK will also have to evolve to keep pace with the pace of innovation of AWS overall. So that also means we need to find out what's the right cycle of release, how well you use it, then how do you then move it from your development system to a sandbox system or a production system, and what are your challenges that you're facing. We want to ensure that before the code reaches production, you will not have to face any kind of breaking changes down the road. The developer preview gives us that time for us to work very closely with you to get back that experience that we can then put it back into our SDK. From a product roadmap perspective, it's there for you to use. The developer preview will extend through second quarter next year. We are planning to implement more as part of our evolution towards the general availability of the SDK. We will add developer features like waiters and paginators. Will support non-commercial regions. So today we are mostly in the commercial regions. Non-commercial regions requires additional security aspects of it, which is also what we want to cover. We will support more streaming services, and definitely will incorporate all the improvements that you have for us. General availability, typically the SDKs within AWS have this time period of close to 12 months. So by Q4, latest by Q4, we should have it available for you. In case there are specific services that's going to make such a big difference in your environment, let us know. We can see how we can work with you to see how we can accelerate those services in your context. But no promises, but this is where our product roadmap is here today. With that, why don't we take a quick look at some demos. I spoke to you about language translation. I spoke to you about address correction. Let's see it in action. These have been created by my colleague John Friesen. He was super excited. He has been a generalist for a long time and a passionate AWS person since 2011. He has been one of the biggest forces to get this SDK out into the market. So he has created these wonderful demos for us to take a look at, and let's get started with the first one.
For this demo, we're going to imagine a scenario where an SAP system needs to translate text from one language to another in real time. And to do this, we're going to use the create service order Fiori transaction here in S/4HANA 2022. And we're going to imagine that we're entering in a service order on behalf of a customer, perhaps. The coffee machine is out of coffee, truly an emergency. And we'll just put in some data here about the sold to party. That should do it. And we'll enter in the long text here, which is the text that needs to be translated from one language to another. Since we're here in Las Vegas for reInvent 2022, let's imagine that our workforce is a mixture of native English speakers and native Spanish speakers. We don't know who's going to process this ticket. So I'm going to save the ticket. And what we'll see is that if we go down to the notes section, that the problem description has been translated in real time into Spanish as well, so that anyone can read the problem description in their native language. Now, the way we did this was by implementing a standard baddie. This baddie is order save. And if we just duck into the code here, we'll just go to the interesting lines of code. The only part that actually calls AWS is these 6 or 7 lines here. We're just calling the translate text method presented by the ABAP SDK from the translate module to translate from English to Spanish. So those 7 lines, that's all it takes to call the service, retrieve the response, and then the rest of our code is just interpreting the response for the baddie.
So you would notice some interesting things out here. So you see that the translate service is referred to as XL8. So the reason is that we cannot use very long names in ABAP. So we had to make some choices of 3-letter acronyms that most suit that particular service that we have. So this is a kind of engineering work that we have taken and made it clear for you. So you don't have to worry about the naming conventions, the translation of data types, and then how you can actually work with it. And now see, as you can see, translation has happened almost instantaneously when you are talking about multilingual teams. Let us look at another example. This is the example of address correction, which uses the location service.
For this demo, we're going to imagine a scenario where an SAP system needs to clean up address data in real time using the AWS location service. The location service is our geolocation service, which has a number of different geolocation capabilities, but one of the things you can do with it is pass an incomplete or incorrect address and receive a cleaned up address. So we're going to do this in S/4HANA 2022. We're going to create a business partner, a fairly common operation. I'm going to go use the create corporate account Fiori application here. And I'm from Philadelphia, so I'm going to create a corporate account called Mayor of Philadelphia. I'm going to enter in the address of City Hall, which is on JFK, 1400 JFK. I'm going to leave out the postal code entirely. This is Philadelphia. And US, this is Pennsylvania. Great. Now, I've deliberately left off of the postal code completely, and the street name is not actually quite correct. This is a colloquial version, JFK, but the full address street name is different. So I'm going to hit enter. That will invoke a baddie, and what we'll see here is that in real time, the address has been replaced with 1400 John F. Kennedy Boulevard, which is the correct name of the street, along with the full zip code. Now, under the hood, this was implemented with a standard baddie, the address check baddie. So that's SAP's standard baddie for checking addresses. And if we look at the code under the hood, the part that's really interesting is the part that calls AWS with the AWS SDK for SAP ABAP. And it's just 8 lines of code here that calls the search place index for text method here and passes the incorrect address or a partially complete address and gets a list of results, and then it takes the first result. So here we have a perfect example of using the AWS SDK to reach out in real time to the location service.
Right. So as you can see, the developer did not really have to worry about mapping security roles, did not have to worry about data formats, had to just make the call and respond to the response that came back and present it in the UI. This is fascinating because now with a location service based UI input validation, you are going to get clean data into your system the moment the users enter the data. That's the kind of innovations that we are expecting you folks to really appreciate and take advantage of as you start to build out your solutions moving forward. You can truly go back to your business and ask, what is the problem you want us to solve? What is it that's going to take SAP information, the SAP context for your business and integrate it and make it available along with the AWS service to create that unique value proposition that you are not able to do before. And that itself is so fascinating and powerful that we are just waiting for you all to join us and take this forward. Apart from the AWS SDK for SAP ABAP, we have a whole bunch of new things that are being launched You should take a quick look at all of them. There are several sessions that are going on here. On the migration side, we have the Migration Hub Orchestrator. On the infrastructure side, we talk about AWS Backup Service. AppFlows now has the ODP support that allows you to do serverless movement of data. And then finally, on management and operations, a bunch of new things that have happened on the Launch Wizard side. So what are your next steps? What's your call to action? Apply to join the developer preview. So we have a sign up form. Please go ahead and put your information in there. The moment the waitlist is processed, you will get a welcome email, and with that welcome letter you will be able to access and download the SDK. You will have access to the documentation, you will be able to see the API documentation, you can use that to figure out what is that you want to do next. Develop your proof of concept. As I said, the welcome letter will also have an email that you can use to talk to the engineering team directly. So the support is going to be directly from the engineering team as we mature the product and make it available for you, generally available. And definitely answer our survey and provide your feedback. With that, thank you all. I'm Yuva, and my email is here, so if you would like to get in touch with me, please do. I will be more than happy to answer your questions.